Hey friends! It's been a little while since the last video on this game, and quite a bit has changed. So before we get into the meat of things, we're just gonna get caught up on how the game is now. The first thing I changed was how the mana works. Instead of spawning once the enemy dies, mana particles are spawned when the enemy is hit based on how much damage the enemy takes. This lets me control how much the player is rewarded for different PvE interactions. The next thing that I added is that the player can now pick up their arrows. This system will work for any item interaction. Another thing I added for the arrows is that you can now send them back through time. When you shoot an arrow, a blue circle will spawn where the player is standing, and then when you interact with that blue circle, it'll send the arrow back along the path that it was shot at. It'll have infinite piercing, and then when it gets back to where it was summoned, it'll drop, so the player can pick it up. This is a lot more interactive than just being able to summon the arrow wherever you are, and it's going to play a very big role in combat later on. I did a whole lot of optimization, things like changing hitboxes and just programming better altogether, but the biggest optimization is that I have a new computer, so recordings will be way higher quality. The final change I made is that I added some new animations.
Why are we still here?
The player can now roll, dodge, and slide. That's pretty much it for all of the changes. I didn't end up getting any new art, so we... didn't actually expect that to work. Before we get started, make sure to press big funny red button, please. We have several mechanics left for combat, and the first thing to do is rework all of his base attacks. This needs a rework for a couple of reasons. The first reason being that right now, he stops after 3 swings. I want his attacks to loop through a couple of animations perfectly, so that the player may keep swinging until they decide to stop or an enemy forces them to stop. This is going to make it easier for the player to push back crowds of enemies, while also giving the player multiple opportunities to choose how they want to end their combo. We have to give the player multiple combo finishers. Right now it's going to be one for knockback, one that will allow you to leave the sword inside the enemy to set up for the magical event later, and then another one for damage. So I'll set that up now, and I'll be back once I have something to show. It's been another little while, and I had a bit of a gaming moment. So let's get caught back up. Again. While animating combo finishers, I came across quite a few problems, and I decided that it would probably be best just to have a bit of a restart, not completely, but rethink some of the more basic things. The biggest problem that I ran into is that I'm trying to make the sword move 3D, but the character's only 2D. So that's why we have this guy. For now, his name is... and we'll be working with him until I get a 3D model of the actual character. That being said, the game will still be 2D, it's just a lot easier to animate the sword in 3D. Thanks, Unity. Another big change is that Unity actually updated their input system, so that's what we're going to be messing with now. At some point we're going to have to implement key binding, and I figured that doing it now would be a good way to get introduced to the new input system. So let's get started with that. First things first, I had to make a title menu so I could have a place to actually put the key bindings. Though after spending so much time reading about the input system, I was starting to run low on occipital stimulation. To combat that, I added these 2 funny spinning circles in the back of the menu, and they work really well. After working on it for a while, I got it to the point where it had both keyboard and gamepad support. I might add more in the future, but I don't want to right now because I don't have any of those, so I don't feel like it. Just for a bit of gamer speak, every time the player overrides a binding from the controls menu, a script will iterate through every single binding override and then save that to player prefs. That way once the game is opened, all of the bindings will be set to however the player had them last. That's pretty neat and all, but it did come at a bit of a price, that of course being my sanity. So I'm now going to take out that frustration by showing you how it works. So the way that it works is that I use the built-in input manager in Unity, and then I go to the bindings, and then I can just add a new one. Let's say we want to call it Sprint, then we just throw it right in, give it a keyboard binding, a gamepad. Now that the key rebinding system is in a pretty good spot, we're going to be trying to re-implement the enemies. The first thing we want to do is try and replicate the little spawning animation they have. Getting it basically right wasn't that much of a problem, and it just took a little bit of work to make it a little more accurate. With that done, let's work on making the enemies follow the player. Because I'm not a little baby, I'm not going to be using the navigation system Unity already has in place. Yet. Because the enemy can only move on a horizontal plane, it's a lot easier to just get a distance calculation between the player and the enemy, and then add a force based on where the enemy is relative to the player. While doing that, I quickly re-implemented the mana particle system that we had in place before. It'll do for now, but we're going to have to touch up on some of the mechanics later. Because I don't take my schooling very seriously, I decided that I'm going to try and make a playable game based on the template that we already have. I have about 2 weeks to do this. That being said, let's get started on an upgrade system. The main idea is to just have a menu that the player can go to upgrade some basic stats for each element. There will be some stats exclusive to each element, and we can get into that a little later. The way the elements and the upgrades work is pretty modular, which means that it's really easy for me to add or change things within the inspector, so we're just going to go over that real quick. In order to add a new element, all we have to do is add to a list of all the existing elements. When we do that, it's going to ask for a bunch of different data. We fill that in, and then we can move on to the upgrades. Upgrades work pretty much the same way, but the only one that will actually affect the element is damage, just because I would have to program specific interactions for any other upgrade that we do add. But as you can see, it exists in the element wheel, you can upgrade it, and the enemies will drop the corresponding particles. Now that the upgrade system is working, we're going to have to go back and revisit the mana particles. The enemies have two element types. They have a primary, and that's going to control their color, and then they have a secondary. They drop significantly less of their secondary element, and it doesn't actually affect the enemy's behavior. The reason we have a secondary element is because the next element the player picks up that they don't have will dictate which element the next wave will be. Another reason is that the player needs to pick up at least one of an element type's mana to unlock that element. At the start of the wave, the primary element is set to the last element the player picked up, unless they haven't picked up an element, meaning they just started, in which case it's always time. And the secondary element is a random element that the player does not have. This method makes it so the only thing I need to do to increase the duration of the game is to add more elements, which makes it very easy for me. With progression all done, now I can focus on tacking off some of the project requirements and trying to make the game not a waste of time. The first thing we're going to do is make an inventory, and the first thing we need to do that is to get boxes on the screen. That means that I have to write an algorithm to sort the inventory slots in neat rows. And as you might know from the past, I'm really good at writing sorting algorithms. But because of all those failures, I've learned and grown as a person, and now I can do it on my first try. Okay, the sorting's working now. I can change the row size, how many rows there are, how many slots there are, kind of epic. All I have to do now is add a way to pick up items and interact with them when they're in your inventory. Seeing that arrows are the only item that I have in the game right now, we'll be using those to test. The way the inventory is going to work is going to be pretty simple. They're going to be able to interact with an item to pick it up, and then when it's in their inventory, they can use it, move it, or drop it. Though the arrows don't really have a use, so the inventory system is pretty much done now, but it also doesn't really serve much of a purpose, but at least it takes off one of the requirements for the project. The next thing on the list is to give the enemies moving and attack animations. I won't be giving the player any animations just because it would take too long. With the enemies being able to kill the player now, we pretty much have a functional game. All I need to do now is work on adding some special upgrades for each of the elements. At this point, I only had about a day left to implement all of the special upgrades, so I had to work pretty quickly. The only thing I ended up making a particle system for was fire, the other stuff only had their effects through code. Each element has a different effect, except for light and dark, which are just used for big damage. Fire is an effect over time, ice is an effect over time, but it also slows the enemy down. The time element slows down enemy animation speed. Earth is knockback, lightning is able to chain over multiple enemies over a distance, water adds a damage multiplier, and air pushes the enemies back. The last thing I needed to do to make the game playable was make it so that more enemies spawn as you progress through the waves, and that the enemy's health increases every wave. At this point the game is pretty much functional. There's just one bug that my friend found that I have no idea what to do about, so we're just gonna hope that he's the only one who's able to find the bug. I noticed a problem where the player would want to walk off the map, so I put a tree in the foreground that stops the player from getting too far. Though the tree's a little hard to distinguish, so I took some measures to make it a little more noticeable than the rest of the trees. That's all I could manage to do in the time that I had. All in all, pretty terrible. Probably just gonna restart again next episode. So I just found this news site. It's called porp.neocities.org. As you can see, we have the rats. They serve as the main enemy here. I get hit by one. Oh no. Mr. John Berger has a bit of an angry moment, and that's good for nobody. It's okay. You can pick up the rest of the porps. Get most of your porps back. But so I just found this new site, porp.neocities.org. Pretty interesting so far. So I just found this new site. Alongside the rats, it looks like we actually have these big triangles. It looks like they stun you. Pretty tough stuff. but we need that extra bit of challenge just so that we can experience these gamer moments. And from playing this game as I have been for the past couple of years, I've experienced many gamer moments. Very, very impressive stuff on this new site that I just found. Once you collect all the Porps, there's a very, very special reward for you. So make sure you beat the game and check out what that is. Now, actually, there are multiple Porps. It's a whole franchise, really. This game has been going on for quite some time now, and I've been following along very religiously, even. So now we're actually going to move on to Halloween Porp. This one's very scary. As you can see, Mr. Burger has a skull on him. For any parents that are watching this, please do probably put this on like a blacklist for all the URLs your children are allowed to go to. Very scary, and we really don't want to be scarring our children like this. But as you can see, the Porps are black and orange, and the rats, very scary, very red. Christmas Porp. Got the red-green. Looks like Mr. Burger. Pretty festive, too. He's got his hat on. Very neat stuff. In case you're Australian, we have Australian Porp. Pretty neat. As you can see, the rats look to be kangaroos. We have Family Day Porp, in case you have a family. Very cool. Looks like we have alcohol. That seems to be Ray William Johnson. So that's a pretty neat touch. Finally, Porp China, Chinese Porp. You should definitely check this game out for yourself. Cool site. Just came across it. And like I said, I've had many gamer moments from this site. And if you're wondering what a gamer moment is, you're just going to have to play to find out. Try to get all the rewards. You'll be very happy with them. I've said a lot about it, so now I'm just going to let the game speak for itself. Thanks for watching. See, I heard that there's actually this glitch where YouTube unsubscribes